Hello, I'm Professor McCoy, and today I want to talk about the Thrawn Trilogy from the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Now, I've talked about the Thrawn Trilogy a little bit before in the context of my sort of Star Wars recommended reading list, which you'll find linked below. And in that one, I did mention that I don't think that it's actually the best place to start reading the Star Wars EU, contrary to popular belief. I always recommend, if you're going to dive into the EU, to do it chronologically and start with Truce at Bakura and go along your way, and eventually you will get your way to the Thrawn Trilogy. That said, if there is one thing that you've read from the Star Wars EU, probably 9 times out of 10, it'll be the Thrawn Trilogy or some part of it. And that's not without reason. It is basically the foundation of the Star Wars EU. It was one of the first things written for it that actually maintained continuity, and it's actually pretty good. Now, it's not the best, and I know that's controversial too, but there's a lot in there that is absolutely worth reading and worth talking about. So, I wanted to talk about one little aspect of it that I haven't actually seen talked about all that much. Now, it may have been all those years ago when it came out, maybe on the Star Wars forums or among fan discussions, but I was an infant then, so I didn't really have a chance to participate in that discussion. So, let's talk about it now, 30-something years later. And that is Luke's, what we might call, imposter syndrome. Now, I say that with a bit of irony, because I think that Luke experiences imposter syndrome, first of all, in his role as a Jedi Master, and most of all, as a teacher, and then also, given the fact that one of the primary antagonists, or at least obstacles, in the book, is an evil clone of Luke Skywalker. So, there's a kind of... it makes me wonder if there is meant to be a kind of dramatic mirroring going on there. But letting the irony of this, or perhaps the cleverness of this be set aside, I want to talk about Luke as a teacher, and as a Jedi, and him sort of coming into his role that we see throughout the Thrawn Trilogy, which really I do think makes it an excellent sequel trilogy, a kind of follow-up to the original trilogy. We get to see Luke as a Jedi Master, as a teacher, as all of these things that he was clearly on a trajectory towards becoming. Now, the novels open with the Force Ghost of Obi-Wan Kenobi coming to see Luke one final time. And he's explicit about this, and he's upfront about it, that this is the last time that I'm going to be appearing. And I'm going off to become one with the Force, and I'm not going to be showing up anymore. And he's there essentially to remind Luke and to encourage him to follow some of Yoda's last instructions, to pass on what he'd learned. Because it had been, at this point, several years since the end of Return of the Jedi, and Luke hasn't actually taught any students yet. Now, he has tried. It's not for lack of trying. But things had gone wrong for one reason or another with his prior students, or with his prior attempts at having students. And so he is, naturally, he's not very confident at this point in his ability to be a Jedi Master, although he is certainly much more powerful in the Force. He's not confident in his ability to teach, to pass on that knowledge. But he wants to. He wants to find, first of all, someone to teach, but then also he wants to make sure that he's ready to do it. And so this is how he gets lured into the sort of trap of Joruus C'baoth, one of the main villains of the series, not Thrawn, the other main villain. And it's a large sort of inciting dilemma for the plot. But I want to look especially at why. Why is it that Luke Skywalker, this great hero that we all know from the original trilogy, is having so much trouble seeing himself as in the role of a teacher, in passing on this knowledge that he's received? Now, part of it, I think, was filled in later, and with some of the books that take place earlier, notably Truce at Bakura that I've mentioned, as well as the X-Wing series, they were written after the fact. They were written after the Thrawn Trilogy, after Timothy Zahn. And so, perhaps we can say that it was either just written to maintain continuity, it was written this way, or even to kind of fill in the gaps as to why Luke is feeling so such a lack of confidence. And I think a large part of it is that his two major prior attempts at getting students both failed utterly in completely different ways. The first attempt, of course, was in Truce at Bakura with his would-be student Dev Sibwara, who I won't fill in all the details. Maybe that's worth talking about as well. So that might be a deep dive on him for another video, but or maybe some of the other stuff that goes on in that novel. But the main point and how it applies to Luke is that just as Dev agrees to become Luke's student and to learn to become a Jedi, almost immediately after, he dies horribly, and Luke isn't able to save him. He dies heroically, but he still dies, and Luke can't help but in the moment to honor his memory for it, but also to blame himself to some degree. And then a couple of years later, his next prospective student is Corran Horn from the X-Wing series, and when Luke offers to teach him to become a Jedi, to essentially become his first real student, Corran declines. He says thanks, but no thanks, that he has other things that he has to take care of right now that are more important than becoming a Jedi. And so we have this hero of the rebellion, this the first Jedi Master of a new generation, being kindly told thanks, but no thanks. That can't do much good for his confidence as a would-be teacher. I certainly wouldn't mind. And so we have Luke now a few years later hence, at the beginning of the Thrawn Trilogy, being told by Obi-Wan for the last time, once again, this is crucial, that now his mentor has well and truly left. Now he has nothing that he can even hope to lean on, other than himself and his own knowledge and the Force. He's going to have trouble moving forward with this. Now, another element of it is of course, that loneliness, that the fact that he has no support system, and part of what he wants to look for, part of what he tries to look for, is some other additional knowledge, some other additional wisdom that he can use, that he can lean on to help him teach. Which, by the way, this is actually something that we see replicated in Disney canon. In the Disney version of the canon, it takes Luke some time to start teaching students, and a large part of that is because he's been taking so much time looking for ancient Jedi wisdom that he can pass on. And now, of course, under both of these circumstances, and this is a lesson he learns in the Thrawn Trilogy, but fails horribly to learn in the Disney version, but setting that aside, is that Yoda, if you recall, told him to pass on what you have learned. Not go and find out everything there is to find out about the Jedi first, and then teach people that. No, pass on what he's learned. And I've talked about this before as well. In fact, in my commentary on The Last Jedi, and that interaction between Luke and Yoda, both the one in Return of the Jedi that I've been referring to now, and then also their little interaction in The Last Jedi. And I think it is important to remember that Yoda also told him as he was dying, already have you that which you need. But Luke is ready, both to face Vader and then also to restart, to continue the Jedi Order. Yoda was confident of that. Obi-Wan was confident of that. Luke wasn't yet. But he did come to be, and that was a large part of his arc within the Thrawn Trilogy, is becoming ready, convincing himself that he is in fact ready to start teaching, to pass on what he'd learned, to become not just a Jedi, but the new master of the Jedi Order. Now, what can we take away from this as well for our own lives, right? That well, first of all, we all probably suffer from some degree of imposter syndrome. It's part of becoming an adult, right? We are tempted to see ourselves as we have been and not as what we are and are becoming. As a teacher, I understand this completely. In fact, a story I've told a little bit before, probably at least in some contexts, is that I remember my first year as a teacher's assistant where I was doing discussion groups and things, and I was grading papers and all that. I had a student who, first of all, was older than me, which was actually quite common because I became a teacher's assistant when I was barely 22 years old. So I had a lot of students who were older than me. Even when I became an adjunct professor, I was only 25, I think, something like that, 24, 25. And so I had plenty of students who were older than me. I still do on occasion. I'm much older than 24 or 25. But in any case, not only did I have a particular student who was older than me, but I had that particular student was in class with me the previous semester as a fellow student. And that shook me and my confidence in my role as an instructor and a grader. That who am I to be teaching this material when just a few months ago we were students together? Am I that far ahead of you? Really? Well, here's the thing. Yes. On that subject, at least. Yes. Because I was in a position to know enough about the particular subject to teach it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been given that position to. Certainly. But I needed to sort of come to realize that and come into my own and come into my the confidence needed to really do things on my own as I knew I should, and as I knew I needed to, and as I ultimately knew that I was able to. And so sometimes that just takes the courage to just jump in and do it. Sometimes that takes encouragement from other people, from people you might trust, like for Luke, from the Force Ghost of Obi-Wan, and then ultimately also, I should mention, from his sister as well, from Leia. Leia gives him a lot of support and a lot of confidence that he needs as he moves forward. And then also, I will add, from his experience with Mara Jade as well, who he eventually comes to fall in love with and marry, but of course, not yet, not in this book. In any case, this struck me as a fascinating little theme, because I've always been interested in Luke, especially in the EU, as a teacher. Perhaps that's because I'm a teacher myself, and I find that sort of thing very relatable. But and then also, I've always seen Luke as the wise Jedi Master, and to see his less confident early stages of that role, it's good to see where you start, to appreciate where you end up. Because seeing Grand Master Luke Skywalker in the later books of immense power and wisdom and teaching dozens and then ultimately hundreds of students, he's gone quite far, even since after he had already finished his sort of hero's journey in the original trilogy. So that's something that, about the Thrawn Trilogy that, again, I haven't seen talked about too much, that I think is definitely worth thinking about, worth discussing, worth looking at. So I hope you thought so too, and until next time, I'll see you.